Greetings, brave scholars. I'm really happy that you're going to take some time with this video today to learn more about literary scholarship and the kind of things that the scholars of literature do. I will be conducting this presentation with the help of Edward James's Science Fiction in the 20th Century, Abrams's Glossary of Literary Terms, his element on satire, and an important work from right before the turn of the century by Hayles about posthumanity and virtual intelligence and many of the issues that we're facing today. All the more impressive her work has become, considering that it was written before smartphones were the thing. Okay, going to speak a bit about literary scholarship's target of analyses. What do we look at, and diverse approaches. How do we look at them? And there are a lot. I'm going to take you through 3 generations of literary scholarship, I hope somewhat quickly, just to give you an idea of the direction that the field is moving. And I would argue in a direction that will enable us to speak of even more intelligently about technology and humanity in the future. Then I will briefly treat elements that we went over in the course. I know it has been a long time. Perhaps some of you have decided earnestly to write a thesis on involving literature or society and media, to the degree that you think that I could help you with that. And in those conversations, we will go into even more depth and more specificity. But for right now, basically, the intention is to give you the half hour, 40-minute overview of the field. So obviously we're going to revisit satire with Abrams's definition. Yes, there were a lot of words there that you probably didn't have access to, like Menippean and things of that nature. Not to worry. The important thing is that literature that deals with technology frequently is in a satiric mode, and he cites 2 examples in particular in his long list, and I will point those out. Edward James, his Science Fiction in the 20th Century is probably the best single volume book on science fiction ever written. I had the privilege of having him as my one of my 2 opponents for my PhD ages ago. And he, I think, negotiates Seuvin's criteria of cognitive estrangement in a very intelligent way, but also makes sense. He is actually by trade a medievalist. Medieval literature is his thing. He makes a very strong claim for historical fiction having a similar element of cognitive estrangement, and even tries to fold science fiction into historical fiction. And this is the kind of games that literary scholars play with. And then I will briefly treat the conclusion to Catherine Hales's How We Became Posthuman. This book came out in 1999, and it is still the go-to text when it comes to considering these. Now, Catherine Hayles comes to the table with a lot of understanding of science and technology before being a literary scholar. I believe she has an advanced degree in chemistry. I know that she has written extensively on technology and text before this book. Her further work has only gone to reinforce this the degree of respect that I have for her, and how we became posthuman, virtual bodies and cybernetics, literature and informatics. Um, uh, has one chapter involving Norbert Wiener and another chapter involving Philip K. Dick. So what is not to like about this book? It's in the library and it's still in print. And I think we even have it available to us as an ebook at the university. Okay, so what do we focus upon? Well, we have here a work of, I guess I could call it science fantasy. It's by the same author that wrote Tarzan. Really one of the most influential writers of the first half of the 20th century, Edgar Rice Burroughs. And he had, in addition to Tarzan, he had the John Carter series of novels about life on Mars. And there's John Carter holding Thuvia, the maid of Mars. Yeah, you know, he looks like he's been hit in the weight room, and she looks like a supermodel. But just remember, it's the cover of a book that I bought when I was 15. Okay, so when you are a scholar of literature, your focus during your education is on literary and cultural texts, and these overlap because a cultural text can be a literary text that says something about the culture. And our targets encompass primarily novels, short story, poetry, essays, travel writings, biography and autobiography, journalism and new journalism, film, photography, comics, paintings, other elements of visual expression, recorded music, song lyrics, graffiti, as you will see in White Noise, even cereal boxes. And these texts may be considered as classics. That is, that they belong to a canon. They belong to a list of things which you really must read if you're to consider yourself a well-rounded, educated adult, or included in popular culture studies, either with a historical or a more contemporary focus. And science fiction has kind of been between the classics and the popular culture. Originally, they, of course, were considered popular texts, potboilers, subgenre. But after people understood how to read them, and after some really good writers, expanded into that métier, it has moved more into the classics territory. I don't think that a well-rounded adult of your generation should be without having read Dune, Stranger in a Strange Land, and some works by Philip K. Dick. They are part of our new canon, if you will. Okay. Oh, brave who new world that has such things in it. Our literary approaches are very dependent upon the considerations, the writings of Sigmund Freud. Most feminism that you have been exposed to in the second semester of this program can trace its roots to that. Symbolism, stream of consciousness, all the elements that we attribute to the high literature of modernism. Also are laid at the lap of the good docent Freud, and of course, every time there is sex in a novel or a fantasy novel or a regular novel, there's a nod in the direction of Sigmund Freud. Okay, so when we take on these target texts, we have a lot of ways to approach them. One of them is just simply their aesthetic value. How well do they fit into the genre? For instance, this is a really good English sonnet. It's well articulated. The rhythm is iambic pentameter. The rhyme scheme is faultless. It sets up a problem at the beginning of the poem and it kind of answers it at the end. Or you could say this is a really good novel. You empathize with the protagonist. The protagonist develops during the course of the novel. Or this is a great film adaptation of that novel. It does all these things, and then you provide good reasons why. Furthermore, you could just say, it really does something kind of cool and interesting. It's innovative in a way. Literary studies outside of talking about Greek and Latin, Roman texts, has been with us since Matthew Arnold introduced it in the middle of the 19th century. It is, I'll go out on a limb and say it is a Victorian invention, but it really expanded with the post-war period, with the fields of what's called new criticism, narratology, and linguistic criticism. And all of these, linguistic criticism is kind of morphed into what's called discourse analysis now. Perhaps Martin Engbertson talked about that with you in his lecture. But these are looking at literary texts as literature, a very, very strong focus on how they function as literature. How do they create this seamless dream that literature can give us? Or another approach is through ideological values. For instance, this novel exemplifies the plight of the proletariat. This novel shows the situation of women in 19th century rural England, or this novel talks about citizens of colonized countries, and this would be criticism on the basis of social or economic class, feminist criticism, or post-colonial criticism. And this is the more accepted literary approach, particularly when compared with new criticism and linguistic criticism, although narratology still gets a lot of mileage as a field. Also, with ideological values, we get into psychoanalysis, identity studies. How does this work express womanhood? How does this work express a Latin American identity? How does it express Native identity in the face of a colonial oppressor? Diverse historicisms, putting it in its, if you will, in its historical context and showing the politics of that period. Diverse other structuralist and post-structuralist approaches. How do the readers respond to the work? How does the work contain several different voices that talk with each other? That's dialogical criticism. By the way, something that, if you can recall back to Duadroyd's dream of electric sheep, sometimes Philip K. Dick would show the world through J.R. Isidore's eyes. Sometimes he would show it through Rick Decker's eyes. Sometimes he would even show it through Batty's eyes. So see, these are different approaches. They're in a dialogue with each other. Semiotic approaches, myth criticism, semiotic approaches focusing on symbols and symbology, how um, how items are exploited for extra meaning. Myth criticism focuses not so much on myth like Apollo and Persephone, but more on cultural myths, such as we did touch upon, these stories that are naturalized by our media and our society. Um, Also, some works, such as satire and parody, really do involve several different paradigms to discuss the aesthetic quality and how it talks about the society that it is criticizing. And in general, you can pretty much mix the approaches available. I wouldn't recommend using too many at once, though, but you have to say why your approach is going to show something interesting about the target text that you are focusing on. Super important. Sometimes you can do an author study. You know, the works of Aldous Huxley that talk about technology or society. The works of Philip K. Dick that talk about technology and society. The works of Don DeLillo that talk about technology and society. The works of Ira Levin that talk about technology and society. But that, you're focusing on the world the author lived in, what they may have been preoccupied. You can even pretend to psychoanalyze them if you want. Certainly, Philip K. Dick has a wealth of mental issues that one could focus on. But basically, your approach is from the author, and you generally have to do more than one work because it's not a full 60-point thesis. I would recommend limiting it to no more than 3 works, no matter which approach that you adopt. Comparison and contrast of related works. You wrote a paper for me, or 2 actually, that were based upon this idea. You have 2 works. They're kind of similar. They're kind of different. You discuss how and why and wherefore. Or thematic studies. And this can fit in with the identity studies, or the political studies, or just the notion of silence. If you reread Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, notice how both Deckard and particularly Isidore are preoccupied with silence and emptiness and the not being able to hear. So, it could be something as specific as that. Adaptation studies. How well does the movie do the novel? These are once upon a time. These were very, very popular studies to have a look at. You could talk about societal relevance of the work and its function in creating a notion of identity, be it national identity or gender identity or racial identity. You could talk about works as utopian or dystopian. And as Edward James has pointed out for you, utopias and dystopias also operate with cognitive estrangement, just like science fiction. Also, it is I want to use a nicer word than fashion. It's the done thing to use your analysis to evaluate the success or the problems with a certain arrangement of society. So particularly in the conclusion, but also during the analysis, you're allowed to evaluate and basically say what you think is good and bad with both society and the work of literature. And this has been deemed critical theory, but don't let the word theory throw you. In the humanities, when someone talks about theory, literary theory, critical race theory, critical historical theory, feminist theory, they don't mean a theory. By the time something is called a theory in the humanities, it's already assumed to have been proved enough for us to use it. A vastly different level, lower level of consequence and rhetoric than in the hard sciences. Also, what happens if you set out to prove something and it doesn't turn out that way? Don't be afraid of negative results. You would think with something as intuitive and implicit as writing about a book or a movie that you basically could, prove your point relatively easily. But it's really, really exciting where you, in fact, some of my most enjoyable moments of scholarship come when I had this hypothesis that I was trying out, and my research question was largely enabling me to come up with negative results. No, that element wasn't present to the degree I thought. Okay, I'm going to do really, really, really quick run through of since I have been doing this for over 40 years, the approaches to literature that I have seen, and I'm going to go through so basically it covers 3 generations. Booth's The Rhetoric of Fiction came out in 1961, Selden's A Reader's Guide to Contemporary Literary Theory, and then Tyson's Critical Theory Today, a user-friendly guide. Booth affected me as a bachelor student, but I had a long wait between bachelor's and master's. And then Selden was the text that I used when I took my master's degree, an earlier version, if I'm being honest, but still. And Tyson's 215 was the text that we were using in the English department about 2-3 years ago. For all I know, we're still using it. And this progression, you will see, demonstrates a development in the field of literature which shifts some basic suppositions about the role of the author, or even if there is an author, the role of the reader. How much does she bring to the table to interpret the work? Some questions about the work itself, and also elements of ethics and ideology or values. Okay, so here's Booth's The Rhetoric of Satire, and I'm just going to go through a table of contents of these works very, very quickly, but this approach privileged literary realism. So a good book is that you show, you don't tell. You can bring many narrative voices to work in the text. And then he comes with general rules, axioms. True novels must be realistic. Of course, he plays with this idea, but it does privilege realism. Real people, real situations, real language, real conflicts. General rule 2, the objectivity of authors, how they should try to be objective. Now, mind you, literary scholarship of this time was very strongly influenced by modernism and realism and combinations. So F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, Henry James, Edith Wharton, and all of their writings kind of provided a template for Booth to determine what is good fiction. If we go further, true art ignores the artist. This is arts for art's sake. Is pure fiction theoretically desirable, he asks. No is the answer. Emotion, belief, reader's objectivity. How does verisimilitude involve the reader? Different types of narration. This section, by the way, is extremely useful even today. Very, very much about the author's voice within fiction. Telling and showing revisited. And then some case studies there. Ending with the morality of impersonal narration. And this fellow and another guy named Gardner were very, very much about fiction was moral. Good fiction presented narratives that would edify society and enable us to, borrowing my favorite Marxist saw, to reproduce the means of production. Okay, now we're moving into my early graduate school existence when I decided to to major in English literature. It starts off with Russian formalism. By the way, estrangement or defamiliarization came from this school. And then Marxist theories, production is the most important thing. Structuralist theories, language is the most important thing. Most of my career I have been in this area, actually. Post-structuralist theories, the reader can shape the text, how the reader meets the text via their unconscious. There's a psychological development implicit with some of these approaches. And then reader response theories and feminist criticism. And that has blossomed into 2015 psychoanalytic criticism, Marxist criticism, feminist criticism, new criticism, reader response criticism, structuralist criticism, deconstructive criticism, new historical and cultural criticism, lesbian, gay, and queer criticism, African American criticism, post-colonial criticism. You can pretty much name what kind of criticism, but do note how strong identity has come into the literary curriculum these days. Feminist, lesbian, gay, racialism. It's interesting. Also, it's reflected in our politics, so it's interesting to contemplate what is driving what. But there you have it. And these are things that you can employ. Okay, starting with Abrams's definition of satire, laughter is used as a weapon. There's intertextuality that refers to other texts, but also extratextuality that refers to the thing that you want to ridicule, the target. Allegedly, satire has a corrective function. And of all of Horatian and Juvenalian satire, you don't have to sweat with those, but Menippean satire is the satire of the novel mostly. And you can see this in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, that they have commercials come in. There's prose. There are long conversations. Gulliver's Travels is held up as kind of a template for this, but basically all science fiction does this as well. It also includes explanatory didactic passages to explain a novel item, like in The Voyage of Discovery. And when Abrams is discussing later 20th century works of fiction that are satire, although we don't think of them as satire, he includes two works by American author Kurt Vonnegut. One is an early one-player piano, and the other one is a later one, and analog of nuclear weaponry ending the Earth, called Cat's Cradle. And those are actually works of science fiction, and Kurt Vonnegut was very much a science fiction type writer. Okay. Edward James also discusses other ways to approach science fiction. And by the way, I do hope that you enjoyed reading a full page at the beginning of Dune. I always enjoy reviewing this article. So he points out that science fiction requires a different style of reading, but this would be a style of reading that you also have in fantasy, and this is a style of reading that you have in historical fiction that is dealing with historical periods that you are not particularly familiar with. And that is, you have to be on your toes and look for all the hints and then put the hints together to build the world. And this is very satisfying. Believe me when I tell you, rereading Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is way more fun than reading it for the first time, because you get to actually see how Philip K. Dick is putting this world together. But this type of reading is not for everybody. If you like nurse novels, science fiction is definitely not for you. He does rehearse Suvin's definition that the science fiction is determined by the presence and interaction of estrangement and cognition. Also, the narrative dominant of the novum, validated by cognitive logic. The author asks a what-if situation, and by including the novum, he creates a new historical situation, a kind of a thought experiment. And it's wonderful the way he expresses it, that science fiction is about the history that we can never know. So it's the alternative histories. He also actually kind of defends science fantasy, even though it might have some metaphysical stuff in it, because it has a romance element. But satire still does function as a kind of good marker for science fiction. Certainly, Suvin's cognitive estrangement pushes science fiction more in the direction of satire. He also has science fiction analogous to historical fiction and detective fiction. World construction, cognitive assembly of the world. No surprise that one of the earliest practitioners of science fiction, Edgar Allan Poe, was also the gentleman who invented the detective novel. Also, he points out, James points out, as I have pointed out, that travel writing often presents a similar quandary of world building. The clues to the new estranged world come as hints and references. Hence, science fiction is information dense. And he refers to Frank Herbert's Dune and goes through the whole thing as to how it is that way. Okay, Catherine Hayles is discussing society from a cultural studies perspective. So it's the subtitle of the book is Virtual Bodies in Cybernetics, Literature, and Informatics. And as I mentioned by way of introduction, it is my inspiration and alibi for including Norbert Weiner in the course. But her concluding chapter is very much about the post-human. And she has two competing notions of the post-apocalyptic versus humans embedded in an extended information network. You can read Hayles the way you want to read her. I see her more as championing human embedded in an extended information network, that embracing the post-human possibilities is done primarily by going along with the algorithms. So literature is used to imagine possible futures. Excuse me. She does problematize the old-fashioned notion of stable origin and identity, and having it being displaced by theories of personality involving a number of agents running their own algorithms in your brain. So the post-human avoids the apocalypse at the expense of the liberal individual. The liberal individual, I do this because I am an agent and I have control of my actions. That idea has pretty much been put out to pasture by the last 2 decades examination of cognitive function and brain studies. So technology, to Hayles, frees humans to give attention to other matters. Like neural nets are the first manifestation of this. Now, she talks at length about self-driving ships. Okay, ships that are aided by satellite navigation. But of course, today with Elon Musk on the cultural horizon, she could have just used the example of self-driving cars. Okay? Therefore, our brave new world is to be part of a distributed consciousness, emerging as we do, that should be merging as we do with the post-human. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen. I did manage to bring that in under 40 minutes. If you have any questions or problems with my presentation, go ahead and put them in the comments of the YouTube video, or send me an email and I can sort it out for you on a more personal basis. And of course, if you are thinking that there's anything of this that could be in a measure employed in your analysis, by all means, contact me. I can give advice without being your advisor. I thank you once again for your attention. I hope you have a nice day, and really, best of luck with your master's thesis. It's a very exciting endeavor, and believe me when I tell you, it will give you more than it will cost you. Okay, bye for now.